Hi, today we're going to look at factoring polynomials. The previous videos have gone over how to factor trinomials, but we're going to look at factoring polynomials. Trinomials has three terms. A polynomial basically means it has many terms, which could be one term, which is a monomial, or several terms. These steps are very important. You have to start by factoring out the greatest common factor. For one thing, when you factor out the greatest common factor, it makes all of your terms smaller. The numbers are smaller, the power on the variables is smaller, and it makes it easier for you to factor what's remaining. Now, I've already mentioned it, but when you're looking for greatest common factor, you're looking for constants and variables. It could have one or the other, or it could have both. So make sure it's the largest, usually monomial, that you can take out. Then, after you've done that, now you've taken out the greatest common factor, you're looking at what's left. Count the number of terms. Should be easy enough. If there's two terms, is it an a squared minus b squared? If it's an a squared minus b squared, that's the difference of two squares. It factors into a sum and a difference. A plus b times a minus b. This is also extremely important. When you're working with squares, that has to be a minus. If that's a plus, it cannot be factored with real numbers. If that's a plus, it has imaginary factors. And at this point, you're probably glad that we're not going to worry about those right here. So we're factoring within real numbers. Then look for the cubes. Do you have an a cubed minus b cubed or an a cubed plus b cubed? Now, notice you can have a plus or minus when they're cubes. And when you do that, you will have an a and a b in the first factor. And in the second factor, you're going to have an a squared, an ab, and a b squared. And you may have already been shown how to remember the signs. The first sign is the same as what's in the problem. So if it's a minus there, that's going to be an a minus b. If it's a plus there, it's going to be an a plus b. Then I told you you've got an a squared. The second sign changes. It's the opposite of what was in the problem. If that was a minus, we've got a plus here. If that's a plus, I have a minus here. The last term is a b squared, and that sign is always positive. So, to remember this, you've got same, change, always positive. And hopefully that's not too difficult to remember. Okay, that's all if you only have two terms. You're not always going to have just two terms. So, what happens if you have three terms? Well, if it's three terms, it's a trinomial. And with a trinomial, it says see videos for factoring trinomials. You should have already looked at those, I hope. There are three because I'm trying to keep the individual length of the videos short, so it won't take up so much of your time to watch an individual video, and it makes it a lot faster for me when I'm uploading them to YouTube. So we've already had three videos on factoring trinomials. The first two were when the first coefficient is 1, when you, and that was part 1 and part 2. And then the third video was when the leading coefficient, or the a, was not 1. Remember, we still are from when we counted terms. If there are 4 terms, we're going to factor by grouping. I have a PowerPoint that is posted on factor by grouping. I am also going to do some examples that will have factor by grouping. In fact, I think the first one I do has a factor by grouping. Now, 3. After you counted the terms and figured out what to do, is it factored completely? Look at the factors that you've come up with. Can they be factored further? In other words, it's possible that in one of those factors, you've got a greatest common factor. It probably won't be there for most of the problems, because if you take it out at the beginning, that should be it. And then you're just going to follow this straight through until you have it factored completely. Okay, I'm going to erase the board, and we'll be right back with some examples. Okay, for the magic of starting and stopping the video, we have the problem up here. The first thing we need to do is look for greatest common factor. The first 3 terms all have an x in them, but that doesn't make it a greatest common factor because the last term doesn't have an x in it. We have 2 terms with 5s, but again, it's not a greatest common factor because we would need them all to have a 5. So, we're done with the first step. There is no greatest common factor. Now, the second step says and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. If there's 4 terms, it's a factor by grouping. Now, there are a few cases where this won't work, but usually it's easier just to group the first 2 terms together and group the last 2 terms together. And if this doesn't work, you could try rearranging the terms. Once we put the parentheses in, we have to notice there's a negative or a minus between the parentheses right there. Well, when we put the parentheses in, our math rules tell us that that means that negative is going to be distributed. And it's going to give me a minus x and a minus 5. Well, in the original problem, I had a minus x, but that 5 is positive. And when I put the parentheses in, it didn't change that sign. So you have to change that sign. When that's a negative, leave it. Go inside and change that. And we're going to change that to a minus. As long as you remember to do that, you shouldn't have any problems. Now we're going to look at the first grouping, x cubed minus 5x squared. Well, there's an x in each term, but there's an x squared in each term. Take out the largest factor that you can, and that's going to leave me an x in the first term, a minus, and a 5 in the second term. Now, bring down the negative sign. That doesn't go away. And nothing will factor out of x minus 5, so we're going to leave that as x minus 5. Now, because of what we're doing with factor by grouping, and I don't want you to make any careless errors, when there is nothing that you took out, put a 1 there. And you'll see why in just a second. Now, if you look at these, that has a factor of x minus 5. This also has a factor of x minus 5. Okay, so I've got 2 terms really now because they're separated by that minus. I can take an x minus 5 out. And when I take that out, that leaves me with an x squared here and a minus 1. Now, this is where the last step that I had written way down here said, is it completely factored? If not, go back. Well, neither of these have its greatest common factor. However, that has 2 terms, that's fine. That has 2 terms. That is actually an a squared minus b squared. This is x squared minus 1 squared. And that can be factored. So the x minus 5 stays where it is. X squared minus 1 squared factors into x plus 1 times x minus 1. And that is how you factor when you have 4 terms and you do factor by grouping. Now, we haven't done a lot of examples. That's why I use that here. It is a factor by grouping, but once you got down here, you still had to factor the x squared minus 1. So make sure you're looking for all possibilities when you're checking at the end to make sure that everything factored. This is going to be the end of this video. There will be a part 2. Part 2 is going to be some more examples.